Questions regarding the standard Islamic narrative have been around for a long time. We can trace them back to the writings of John of Damascus concerning the heresies he encountered in the 8th century. Historians have seriously been considering the question since the 1800s. So when German scholars and Patricia Krohn and Michael Cook began publishing their research in the 1970s, critical review of this narrative was nothing new. But as the Islamic religion took on an increasingly political dimension in the modern era, it became difficult to discuss the issues without hostile reactions. A period of silence has descended, with some scholars accusing others of protecting the narrative from scholarly and scientific scrutiny. And yet, because of archaeology, the questions just won't go away. Let's talk about that right now. In the 1800s, Jewish and Christian religion took a blow on the chin when Charles Darwin presented his take on the evolutionary theory. There were others before him, but his seemed to be backed up by real science. In the decades following, however, his theories were found not as solid as they seemed to be, and evolution remains a family of theories that is ever-changing. In other words, evolution has evolved and still is. But something else emerged alongside Darwin's evolution that would test religious claims: archaeology. Then, to the surprise of even Christians, in the decades and centuries following, archaeology was proven to be solid supporting evidence for places, cultures, and people mentioned in the Bible. As a result, both Judaism and Christianity have survived their intense scrutiny on textual, historical, and even some major scientific grounds. The New Testament is now understood to have historical support from archaeology for its writings, geography, the person and crucifixion of Jesus. But Islam hasn't fared as well amidst its historical criticism. The first reference to the term standard Islamic narrative was given by Yasser Qadi, one of the foremost scholars on the Qur'an. The standard Islamic narrative is a collection of what Islam says about itself, according to its history and traditions. It includes the biography of Muhammad, the sayings of Muhammad, the hadith, the commentaries to explain the Qur'an, and then the histories. As you can see, these overlap in their significance and support of each other. One of the claims in the narrative suggests that Muhammad's tribe opposed him because they were polytheists, and that polytheism in pre-Islamic Arabia was prevalent. But archaeology tells us a different story. Western scholars and archaeologists point out that by the 4th and 5th centuries AD, no polytheistic inscriptions are found, but monotheism with a definite Christian influence is. These inscriptions reveal the historical setting near the eve of Islam. Dr. Ahmad Al-Jallad interpreted a Paleo-Arabic inscription in the Hijaz, Tabuk, Saudi Arabia, near Mecca, and identified it as Christian. The author of the inscription invokes the supreme God to forgive him and uses terms with Hebrew Aramaic meanings. Al-Jallad explains it is the prayer of a man who knows he is a sinner and needs God. It is not the prayer of forgiveness of a specific moral failure. Al-Jallad dates it to the 6th century AD and says the author of the inscription may have been a resident of Mecca. Al-Jallad interpreted another inscription near Mecca, again with obvious influence of the Judaic and Christian monotheism, but he believes this inscription was written by a companion of Muhammad before he became a follower of Muhammad's religion. This might be a shocking revelation until you realize monotheism had swept over the Roman Empire and beyond because of the spread of Christianity. This included the Arabian Peninsula. Churches were present there, and whole tribes are documented to have converted. That is not to say every person was a Christian, but monotheism was certainly the trend. The Qur'an, which began to be compiled in the 7th century, mentions very little pagan gods until you get to the satanic verses. The Bible, on the other hand, mentions several, and this was a reflection of the times in which its books were written. The same is probably true of the Quran. One clue that polytheism was not popular in this Judeo-Christian setting is the hesitation of Muhammad's friend to kiss the black stone. It is a story recorded in the Hadith. Most Western scholars consider the Hadith unreliable, but there are instances of historical note, and in light of Al-Jallad's work, this may be one of them. Historical, literary, and archaeological sources that support the spread of Christianity abound and reach from Egypt to Yemen to Syria to Turkey, Iraq, and even Iran. Scholars conclude Muhammad did not invent monotheism in Arabia. It was already thriving in the Middle East, and Al-Jallad's work seems to confirm it. This is exactly what the New Testament portrays. Several scholars are considering the influence that Christianity had on the Quran and Islam. Islam's prophets are men from the Old Testament and the New. Moses figures heavily in the Quran, as does Jesus. The Dome of the Rock even has a similar design as the Byzantine church built by Justinian I at Constantinople. The Byzantine church was finished in 537 AD. That's over 100 years before the Dome of the Rock was built. As Christianity spread, so did several heresies concerning it. One named Adam, Noah, Abraham, and Jesus as prophets. Another identified Jesus as a teacher and a prophet. Most struggled over defining the identity of Jesus as a divine or not, Son of God or not, able to suffer and rise from the dead or not. They described the oneness of God or the humanness of Jesus. Several of these ideas are found in the Quran. Also circulating during this time were the extra biblical stories and legends of the Old and New Testaments, like the infancy gospel of Thomas, in which Jesus, at 5 years old, formed birds out of clay and turned them into real birds. Some of these tales found their way into the Quran, as did many biblical accounts, though the Quranic versions are scrambled and nothing like the originals of the biblical text. For example, Saul is confused with Gideon, and Haman is portrayed as an official of Pharaoh. So, to sum up, Christianity was a major religion in Arabia at the time of Muhammad. The Quran reflects the influence of Christian language, concepts, heresies, and legends known at the time of its writings, and it condenses and conflates many of the biblical accounts. If you don't know, the Quran is taught as the final revelation because it claims the Bible was corrupted. But those confronting Islam's theology in its first 100 years or so disagreed, labeling it the heresy. Even Muhammad's contemporaries balked at his ideas. Many modern scholars, viewing the rise of Islam in the rearview mirror, consider it a response to Christianity instead of a new revelation from God. The declaration on the ceiling of the Dome of the Rock saying Allah has no son may be evidence for that idea. Another facet of the Paleo-Arabic inscriptions found in Jordan and Saudi Arabia shows an earlier push to standardize the Arabic script than first believed. By the late 5th century AD and into the 6th, the script called Paleo-Arabic became the Arabic language recognized today. Until recently, Abd al-Malik was thought to be the first to call for standardizing the language in the 8th century. But the earlier inscriptions have some scholars wondering if Christian missionaries weren't behind this in order to prepare the way for written text to share the gospel. While a full Arabic Bible wouldn't be in use for some time, Bible quotations in Arabic have been found. So what does all this mean? Well, the claims of Islam do not agree with historical texts and archaeological discoveries. To paraphrase Yasser Qadhi's words, there's holes in the standard narrative. Qadhi should get credit for being honest and respect for his expertise, but questioning the narrative is not allowed. Anyway, Muslims are in the same place Christians were over 100 years ago, but I'm not sure how Islam as a religious system will fare under the same scrutiny. If you're a Muslim, that's not a criticism, it's a caution, because one of the other claims of Islam is that the Bible has been corrupted, but archaeology has proven it wasn't. Unlike the Quran, no one destroyed early copies in order to create a unified narrative. No one blotted out lines of script to update facts or modify its accounts. There aren't 26 different versions with thousands of different meanings, resulting in a change of its doctrine. The Bible, with its unified message from Genesis to Revelation, spans centuries and millennia. It has introduced us to cultures and empires long before the archaeologist and historian knew they really existed. It has provided us with names of officials before their seals were found and names of cities before their ruins were unearthed. Its ancient texts pulled from caves don't waver from the biblical texts we have from Muhammad's era or the Bible you hold in your hands. It boldly told the crucifixion of Jesus regardless of what critics might say, and surprisingly, the account was confirmed by unbelieving Christians whose testimonies survive to this day. It told us Israel would be a country again and about the alliances seen in the Middle East today. Could it be the Bible is the genuine revelation and message from God to those who search for him? The Quran itself says that to be obedient, you must judge by the Torah and the gospel given to Jesus. So with regard to that advice, I'm telling you, the Bible states that Jesus is the final word. The Torah and the Gospels never mention another prophet or new revelation to correct error. Instead, inspired by the Holy Spirit, Paul warned, I marvel that you are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ. Could it be that those first Arabic Christian believers were right? The pre-Islamic author of the inscription near Mecca, who asked God to forgive his sin, was most likely responding to the message he heard about Jesus, who came to take our sin as a punishment on himself and give us new life and to give it to us abundantly. All you have to do to receive this life is to ask Jesus to come into your heart and cleanse you from sin. If you are searching for truth and you sincerely desire to please the Creator of your life, I pray a perfect revelation of saving grace over you. May you know the God over all gods, and may he fill you with the peace you long for.